him to visibly melt before everyone's eyes. Vikir skillfully dodged the falling poison rain, while Adolf created a protective barrier to shield himself and Camus. Ahun, the barbarian, panicked as some poison landed on his hair, exclaiming in fear. Ayan swiftly cut off his hair to prevent further exposure, leaving Ahun on his knees, panting in terror. In a low voice filled with anger, Ayan whispered to him, berating him for screaming in front of Madame Eight Legs. She then glanced at Madame Eight Legs and warned Ahun that if he weren't the shaman's grandchild, she would have killed him. Ayan turned around and in a low voice gave an order to the barbarians, commanding them to retreat. Adolf, carrying Camus, also issued a hushed command to make a run for it. Madame Eight Legs responded with playful noises, seemingly amused by the chaos unfolding before her. Among the fleeing groups, the Balaks scattered in smaller clusters, while the Baskervilles and Morgs retreated together. There was a slight difference in how both groups retreated, but it helped the Madame decide whom to chase after. As Madame Eight Legs charged toward the Baskerville and Morg groups, Adolf expressed his frustration, questioning why the creature was heading their way. A Morg mage stepped forward confidently and told Adolf to leave the monster to him. He began casting a fire spell and proclaimed that fire attacks would be the bug's weakness. With a surge of power, he unleashed the fiery spell upon Madame Eight Legs, resulting in a colossal explosion that engulfed the area. The mage believed he had succeeded, boasting to Sir Adolf about the effectiveness of his attack. However, before he could say anything further, one of the mages standing beside him was impaled by one of Madame's legs. The mage, covered in his companion's blood, trembled in fear, realizing that the fire spell hadn't done anything to stop the creature. As Adolf, Camus, and Vikir continued running, Camus expressed shock and bewilderment at the sight of the monstrous creature. Vikir, who had been lost in thought, suddenly realized something. He came to a halt and turned around to face Madame Eight Legs, surprising everyone with his sudden movement. Staffordshire questioned Vikir, concerned about his intentions, to which Vikir replied that they were all at risk of being annihilated if they didn't act. He proposed that someone needed to tie down the monster's legs. When Staffordshire volunteered, Vikir interrupted, questioning him if he really thought he would be able to tie down the monster's legs with his skills. Vikir emphasized that they couldn't bring this monster into the territory with them and stated that he was the best person for the task of restraining its legs. Vikir placed his hand on the hilt of his sword and turned to Sir Adolf, informing him that there was no time left. With a grave expression, he left the decision in Sir Adolf's hands. Camus looked at Vikir with shock and called out to him, but Vikir pressed on, urging them to hurry and go. Adolf expressed frustration and made the decision to run away, not allowing Vikir's sacrifice to be in vain. Camus, with teary eyes, pleaded for Vikir to return, but Adolf instructed her not to move. The situation grew tense as Vikir prepared to face Madame Eight Legs alone. His hand was tightly clenched around the hilt of his sword at first, but eventually he loosened his grip and let out a sigh. He contemplated his situation, realizing that he had no personal interest in the destruction of the Baskerville territory. Furthermore, he believed that the Allied forces would be unable to stop the growing power of Madame Eight Legs. However, Vikir saw this as an opportunity for himself. If he could fake his death, he could create distance between himself and Hugo's surveillance. This would allow him to buy some time to master the 10th technique that resided in his mind. Once he became skilled enough to stand against Hugo or perfected his ability to hide and control his power, he planned to return to the clan. A red aura began to glow on Vikir's hand, and soon Beelzebub emerged from his hand. Vikir realized that if he didn't use everything he had, he would die. With unwavering determination, he made the decision to utilize every resource at his disposal, including a large amount of mana he had received from the River Styx's blessing, and the ethereal aura that was reserved for the high-ranking Baskerville swordsmanship techniques. Moreover, he wielded the formidable demonic sword known as Beelzebub. Covered in a red aura, Vikir's eyes glowed with a fierce red light. He resolved to utilize all his power and launch an attack. With swift movements, he darted toward Madame Eight Legs and then leaped high into the air. Vikir, hovering in the air, directed his gaze down at Madame Eight Legs. The monstrous creature let out a scream as she locked eyes with Vikir. His hand continued to emit a powerful red glow, with the aura intensifying until it reached its limit. With incredible speed, Vikir shot toward Madame Eight Legs, utilizing the Baskerville 5th technique. As he closed in on her, Madame Eight Legs found herself unable to move her legs, which began to press firmly into the ground. At the same time, Vikir's attack struck Madame Eight Legs' head, causing it to be forced to the ground. From a distance, a radiant red light became visible, rapidly increasing in size. Adolf ran while holding Camus, the Baskerville triplets ran with teary eyes, and a massive beam of light shot up from the location where Vikir and Madame Eight Legs clashed. Camus, watching the scene unfold, was struck with shock. Soon a tear welled up in her eyes. She couldn't contain herself and shouted Vikir's name. Only a bright red glow remained in the now silent forest, marking the aftermath of the powerful encounter. Vikir van Baskerville's head was on a guillotine. He looked ahead with cold eyes and saw Hugo le Baskerville standing under the moonlight. Hugo extended his hand and signaled the guillotine to be dropped. As his head rolled on the ground, he saw people looking at him with cold gazes. Soon, Hugo turned around and started to leave. Vikir looked at his departing figure and thought that in the end, Hugo did it. But before he could think further, his eyes opened, and he found himself in an unfamiliar room with a different roof. He was lying on a mattress covered in bandages, with one of his eyes also bandaged. His body was covered in scars and a rope was tied around his neck. Confused by his surroundings, Vikir wondered where he was. He tried to recall the recent events, questioning how many days had passed since the battle against Madame Eightlegs. He remembered the crucial moment when Madame had been shocked by the explosion's light, which had possibly saved his life. Attempting to get up, Vikir felt excruciating pain coursing through his entire body. He quickly realized that his muscles, veins, and even his bones had been grievously injured. There wasn't a single spot on his body that wasn't affected by the damage. The extent of his injuries after taking a direct hit far surpassed anything he had ever imagined. He had severely underestimated the sheer force behind Madame's attack, to the point where he could feel its impact deep within his bones. He pondered the trap that had caused the neckache he was currently experiencing, realizing it had inadvertently saved him. Considering the situation, Vikir contemplated whether everything was progressing according to his plan. He acknowledged his successful escape from Hugo's watch and the presence of witnesses, including Adolf and Camus, so he didn't need to worry about his death being proven. Vikir exited the room and surveyed his surroundings, observing barbarians strolling around and children learning how to use bows. Recognizing the place as the Balak's camp, known as Bulak, Vikir wondered if he was being held captive there. Realizing that he was amidst a camp belonging to the natural enemies of the Baskerville clan, Vikir grew concerned. He acknowledged his inability to escape with his heavily injured body. As he contemplated his situation, a barbarian girl ordered some slaves to hurry up, warning them about the danger of a wolf's bite. Vikir looked at the slaves and recognized some soldiers from the Baskerville and more clans among them. Perplexed, he wondered why he was not being executed like the others. Just then, a barbarian named Ahun approached him, mentioning his ability to speak Balak. Vikir recognized Ahun as someone from the past, one who had kidnapped Camus. Ahun informed Vikir that he should be thankful for not meeting the same fate as the others. With an evil smirk, he taunted Vikir, highlighting his despair due to his crippled body. Ahun sneered even further, asserting that if Vikir weren't the commander's pet dog, he would have boiled him without delay. Vikir repeated the phrase pet dog in his mind. The mention of being someone's pet dog triggered an image of Hugo attempting to chain him down, and a surge of anger boiled within him. Suddenly, Ahun was taken aback as an immense amount of killing intent radiated from Vikir, unsettling him. He looked at Vikir and was taken aback by the intensity in his eyes. Fueled by his emotions, Ahun threw a punch at Vikir's face, expressing his frustration and calling him an arrogant bastard. Vikir fell to the ground, and Ahun walked away in anger, instructing him to find his owner at the end of the rope. Vikir, lying on the ground, watched Ahun leave and vowed to remember his face. He resolved to make him pay once his body recovered. As Vikir followed the rope, he questioned the length of it, expressing his frustration as he walked without reaching the end. He wondered if his owner awaited him at the rope's end. Suddenly, the rope tightened, and Vikir realized he had reached the end. Surprised, he looked ahead and saw Ayan bathing in a small pond. Vikir stood at the edge of the pond, motionless and silent, as Ayan held the other end of the rope. Ayan smiled and told Vikir to lie down. Vikir, shocked by her words, didn't immediately understand their meaning. Suddenly, she pulled the rope, causing Vikir to fly forward, narrowly avoiding an arrow that would have struck him but instead hit a tree trunk. Ayan then shouted at the children nearby, reprimanding them and instructing them to practice elsewhere. As Vikir lay on the ground, Ayan turned her attention back to him. She expressed gratitude for his role in setting her free at the slave auction. Pointing her finger at him, she explained the principle of returning kindness twofold and revenge tenfold. Since he had saved her once, she had saved him twice. Vikir questioned her about saving him twice. Ayan explained that she had gone back just in case after the huge explosion, and if she hadn't, he would have died. She told him to be thankful that she was tenacious. Confused, Vikir questioned her about the rope and her reason for keeping him alive. Ayan responded, implying that he held a high position within his party. This revelation startled Vikir. Ayan continued, suggesting that she wondered how much his party would pay for his return. Vikir was taken aback by her statement, realizing that he was in trouble. If hostage negotiations were initiated with the Baskerville clan, his plan to escape Hugo's watch would become meaningless. He pondered his options in this difficult situation. With a mischievous grin, Ayan looked at Vikir and revealed her intentions. She told him not to hope for a return to his party because he would become her slave. Ayan proceeded to take out her dagger and cut the rope around his neck. Vikir internally heaved a sigh of relief, thinking that his plan had not failed. She then pointed her dagger at Vikir and suggested that they decide on their titles, with her preferring to be called master. Vikir stood with an emotionless face, remaining silent in response. Ayan, seemingly amused, complimented his rebellious eyes and expressed her anticipation of taming him. Before they continued, Ayan mentioned that there was a place they had to stop by. She urged Vikir to start moving, prompting him to ask where they were going. With a smile, Ayan replied with a rhetorical question, implying that it should be obvious. She explained that it was customary to offer greetings when stepping into someone else's land. They were going to visit the village head, the matriarch. Inside the matriarch's tent, a throne adorned with the heads of bears, jaguars, alligators, and other dangerous animals could be seen. Each head had an arrow stuck in it. Atop this throne sat a woman who exuded a sense of pride. Vikir and Ayan walked together, side by side, as they made their way toward the matriarch's tent. Ayan turned to Vikir and spoke, sharing some insights about their way of life. She mentioned that if Vikir didn't have a place to sleep, he could use a friend's hammock, and if he felt hungry, he could rely on the generosity of those who were more affluent. Ayan emphasized that this was the way the Balaks lived, creating a sense of familiarity and homeliness within their community. However, Vikir expressed his observation, noting that it seemed the Balaks didn't prioritize private assets. Soon, they arrived outside a grand tent, and Ayan pointed out that they had reached the matriarch's dwelling. Ayan entered the tent and announced their arrival, addressing the matriarch as mother. This revelation startled Vikir, causing him to contemplate the connection between Ayan and the matriarch. The matriarch rose from her seat and acknowledged their presence, remarking that she had brought the young boy who had been a topic of discussion. This statement surprised Ayan, who exclaimed her confusion, denying any involvement in such conversations. Meanwhile, Vikir realized that Ayan was the matriarch's daughter and made connections in his mind. He looked directly at the matriarch and acknowledged her true identity as the Night Fox, the female Balak warrior who had left a scar on Hugo's nose bridge. He reflected on the challenges he had faced in the past, recalling how he couldn't traverse the landscape of the La Rouge et La Noire mountain due to her influence. Curiosity lingered as he pondered the outcome if his past self had engaged in a confrontation with her. Vikir assessed the situation, considering his chances of survival. Head-on combat and assassination were out of the question, both at 0% probability. The only viable option seemed to be escaping, offering a 20% possibility of survival. Vikir contemplated these odds, mindful of the danger he potentially faced in the matriarch's presence. The matriarch directed her gaze towards Vikir and remarked that she had seen his face before. Vikir's mind raced, wondering if the matriarch could somehow sense his connection to Hugo through instinct alone. However, Ayan interjected, explaining that most imperial men tend to look similar. Curiosity piqued, the matriarch inquired about Ayan's intentions regarding Vikir, describing him as no different from a cripple. Ayan responded, stating that Vikir would be useful once he received proper treatment, as he was the one who had attacked Madame Eight Legs. The matriarch cautioned Ayan, suggesting that taking action without understanding one's place might have unforeseen consequences. She then shifted her focus to Vikir and expressed that his physical well-being was inconsequential, as long as his seed was fine. Before the matriarch could elaborate, Ayan interjected nervously, revealing her true intention. She stammered that she planned to use Vikir as a slave, deviating from her previous statements. Surprised by this sudden change, the matriarch questioned Ayan's inconsistent statements. Ayan hurriedly clarified, stating that she required a slave to assist her during hunts. The matriarch gently patted Ayan's head, acknowledging that it was the owner's prerogative to decide what they wished to do with their slave. Ayan, with a blush on her face, gazed at Vikir. Meanwhile, Vikir stood in the center of the tent, observing the beam that supported its structure, his thoughts momentarily shifting away from the unfolding conversation. After leaving the matriarch's tent, Vikir initiated a conversation with Ayan, expressing his curiosity. He asked for her name, to which Ayan reacted in shock, berating Vikir for daring to ask questions as a slave. Undeterred, Vikir clarified that he had no intention of addressing her as master, hence his request for her name. With a blush on her face, Ayan reluctantly revealed her name as Ayan. Vikir introduced himself as Vikir and inquired about Ayan's instructions. Ayan shouted indignantly, protesting against a slave addressing her by name. However, she then smirked and revealed her first order to Vikir, to construct a house where he would reside from now on. Ayan's inner thoughts reveled in the opportunity to assert her authority, and rebalance the hierarchy between them. She believed that imperial individuals like Vikir would be incompetent in building a house, thus emphasizing her supposed mastery over him. Lost in thought, Vikir eventually responded to the order, expressing a smile and stating that he found the task to be enjoyable. Time passed, and Ayan stood with a shocked expression on her face as she witnessed the result of Vikir's work, a tent standing before her. She wondered why Vikir, despite his injured body, displayed such skill in building the tent. Observing the tools she had brought for Vikir, Ayan contemplated their uselessness if Vikir continued to excel in the building. Meanwhile, Vikir smiled, reflecting on his past experiences. During times of destruction, swordsmen's survival was limited by their expertise solely in swordsmanship. To thrive in extreme situations, one needed to acquire a diverse range of survival skills. Ayan noticed the presence of drains outside the tent and remarked on their perfection. Vikir then brought up the observation that the matriarch's tent appeared unstable. Ayan, shocked by this revelation, questioned Vikir about her mother's house. Vikir explained that in its current state, during rainy seasons, the ground around the central pillar of the tent would shake, potentially causing water leakage. He offered a solution, proposing to mix limey dirt and gravel from the opposite hill to create bricks. He would then reinforce them by spreading oil and burning it. Ayan, in agreement, instructed Vikir to proceed with the plan. Vikir collected soil and poured it into a container. After preparing the necessary materials, he used a cast to shape the bricks and dried them by heating them over a fire. Finally, Vikir and Ayan arrived at the matriarch's tent, where Ayan explained their intentions to her mother. After the tent was fixed, the matriarch looked on in shock, expressing her frustration at previous failed attempts to repair the roof. She realized that the problem lay with the pillar. With a smile, the matriarch commended Ayan, acknowledging that her daughter had found a truly useful male. She then issued an order to Vikir, instructing him to handle tedious matters like this around the barracks from now on. Sometime later, Vikir was washing clothes near a water source when Ayan called out to him. She initiated a conversation, questioning whether he found it exhausting to slave away, and suggesting that he become an official member of their tribe. Vikir responded that slaving away wasn't too bad, internally noting that this peaceful life was preferable to his previous experiences with the Baskervilles or living in the underdog city. Ayan acknowledged that Vikir seemed disciplined and commented that it would be challenging for a slave to complain. Vikir insisted that it really wasn't that bad, but Ayan disagreed, asserting that tough and tedious work couldn't be easy. As they began to head back, Ayan urged Vikir not to have that attitude and to follow her. She offered to help him in terms of survival and adjusting to their tribe. If he performed well, she promised to untie the rope that bound him. Vikir looked at her with interest and asked what he needed to do. Ayan smiled and said that he was finally being honest. She then challenged him to go on a hunt and capture a huge prey. Vikir was intrigued by the proposition and questioned her about the hunt. Ayan explained to Vikir that the tribe's warriors had been unable to catch large enough prey recently, resulting in the growing children going without meat. She emphasized that if Vikir could bring in a huge prey, it would not be unrealistic for his title to change from slave to commoner. Playfully, Ayan slapped Vikir's back and mentioned that he seemed capable of moving lighter objects, so his role would be to assist her. As Ayan jokingly reminded Vikir that he should be grateful for being the slave of the Balak's hunting commander, Vikir felt a pang of pain from her slap on his back. However, after a moment of thought, he agreed to go along with her plan. Ayan's face beamed with a smile, and a slight blush appeared on her cheeks. She then stated that they would be leaving tomorrow for the hunt. When Vikir questioned her smile, Ayan retorted, denying that she was actually smiling. Unbeknownst to them, a figure secretly observed their conversation. It was Ahan, who looked upon Ayan happily engaging with Vikir, but his heart was filled with jealousy and anger. He couldn't help but regard Vikir as a disgusting bastard. Balak's shaman, Ahuman, withdrew his hand from a pot of charcoal and extended it, signaling the beginning of the hazing ceremony as he ordered the hunters to gather around. A line of barbarian hunters stood before him, awaiting their turn. Ahuman emphasized the significance of receiving his blessing and warned that those who didn't would face difficulties. Ayan explained to Vikir the reason behind the hunter's charcoal markings. They used charcoal to conceal their faces from the god of death, as they felt guilty about killing their prey. Vikir acknowledged that even the warrior tribe of Balaks had a shaman. One of the barbarian girls commented on the shaman's nagging, while her male companion suggested letting him be, as the shaman needed to establish his position. The girl expressed doubts about the effectiveness of the shaman's blessings because they had often failed in the past. She indicated that they only sought his blessings on specific occasions. Vikir wondered if her skepticism meant that the shaman's position held little meaning, realizing that this place wasn't much different from others. Sometime later, Ayan stood with her face adorned in comical charcoal markings. Vikir looked at her and jokingly remarked on her appearance. Ayan wiped the markings off her face and angrily retorted, stating that she didn't get along with the shaman. In her embarrassment, she offered Vikir a collar. Vikir held the collar in his hand, questioning if it was a dog collar. Ayan proceeded to put on a collar herself and explained that they wore them to protect their necks from being bitten by their prey. Vikir contemplated the situation and decided that since he was already there, it would be better to adapt to this place. As Ayan and Vikir rode a wolf, she reminded him to hold on to her waist, concerned about his safety. Vikir assured her that he would be fine, and they set off. Ayan glanced back at Vikir, who had fallen off the wolf, and playfully chided him for not holding onto her waist, warning him about the consequences of his actions. Vikir wondered if he would be able to get up in his current state. Suddenly, Vikir noticed that someone had arrived before them. It was Ahun, the barbarian who had been secretly following them. Ayan dismounted from the wolf and called out to him. Ahun commented on Ayan's apparent freedom, accusing her of playing around with her slave. Ahun then came close to Ayan and stated that he was going to catch bigger prey this time. He declared that in the next joint hunt, he would be the captain of the hunting group. He even went as far as putting his grandfather's honor on the line. Ayan questioned his decision to stake his grandfather's honor on something he only knew about shamanism. Unexpectedly, Ahun launched a powerful kick aimed at Vikir's face, surprising Ayan. She angrily confronted him, questioning his actions. Ahun smirked and belittled Vikir, questioning how she could use an injured male as a hunting assistant. He told her to get a hold of herself and claimed that he would only be a burden to her. Suddenly, Ayan noticed something and smiled. She told Ahun to check his waistband before saying those things. Confused, Ahun looked at his waistband and exclaimed in shock. Meanwhile, Vikir spat out some blood from his mouth. With Ahun's quiver and arrow in his grasp, Vikir smiled and remarked that Ahun should hold on to his weapons as he would with his lover. Ahun was shocked by the revelation that his weapons had been taken. He glared at Vikir in anger and Ayan burst into laughter upon hearing this. Suddenly, Ahun attacked Vikir with a punch, calling him an arrogant slave bastard. However, before the punch could reach Vikir, Ayan swiftly intervened, using her bow to block the attack, and shouted at Ahun, commanding him to stop. She questioned Ahun in a cold voice, asking him whose slave he thought he was punishing on his own accord. Ahun, filled with anger, exclaimed that Vikir was a slave and had insulted a Balak warrior. Ayan responded, stating that Ahun had been acting pathetic in front of Vikir. Ahun continued to argue, questioning why she was defending Vikir so passionately, and suggesting that she might have developed feelings for the slave. Ayan, frustrated, placed her hand on her head and conceded, acknowledging that Vikir was indeed a slave and should be punished if he had done something wrong. However, she emphasized that Ahun didn't have the right to punish him because Vikir was her slave. Vikir, who was still on the ground, looked at them with a questioning expression. Suddenly, Ayan unleashed a powerful punch aimed at Vikir's face. Ahun watched the scene in shock, his mouth agape as blood sprayed onto the lush green grass. Ayan gazed at Ahun with cold eyes and asked if he was happy now. With a mixture of coldness and anger, she warned Ahun that she knew he was upset because he had failed to capture a maiden for himself before. But if he ever harmed her slave again, she would beat him up. Ahun, taken aback, reluctantly agreed. Sometime later, Ayan and Vikir continued riding the wolf, but Ayan kept looking at Vikir with apologetic gazes. She asked if it hurt, but Vikir remained silent. She then inquired if he was angry, but Vikir remained silent once again. Ayan explained that her actions were necessary to stop Ahun's petty retaliations, as he was a stubborn and petty person. Seeing that Vikir was still silent, Ayan asked why he wasn't replying. Finally, Vikir responded, saying that it hurt. In response, Ayan jumped up in the air and landed back on the wolf's back, facing Vikir. She caught his face and anxiously asked if it hurt a lot, if it was bad, and if his life was in danger. Vikir replied that it hurt to talk and that he had experienced similar injuries before. But before Vikir could finish his sentence, Ayan's lips landed on his. After some time had passed, Ayan's face blushed red, and she placed her fingers on her lips. She suddenly turned forward in a hurry and said that she knew she was right, stating that Vikir showed promise for an imperial bastard. Vikir wiped his face and pondered if barbarians usually licked each other's injuries, considering it dangerous as it could spread infection. Ayan looked back at Vikir and asked if there was something he wanted from her, promising to do anything if it was within her capabilities. Vikir asked if he could ask for anything. Hearing this, Ayan's body trembled and she assured Vikir that a Balak warrior never goes back on their word. Vikir contemplated his request while Ayan wondered why he was thinking so hard. Her face flushed red, and she suspected that Vikir might be pondering something strange. Finally, Vikir revealed that he had decided what he wanted. Hearing this, Ayan waited in anticipation, her face covered with a blush. Finally, Vikir asked Ayan to teach him how to shoot arrows. Hearing this, Ayan's face turned down with disappointment, but she agreed to his request. As they continued forward, Ayan suggested that from tomorrow onwards they engage in some special training. She inquired if this plan was acceptable, and Vikir nodded in agreement. As Vikir fired an arrow at the tree trunk, Ayan expressed disappointment in his archery skills, instructing him to aim at the embedded arrow instead. Vikir questioned whether it was appropriate for her to teach him in that position. Ayan smiled and reminded him that it was he who asked to be taught how to use the bow. She emphasized the importance of learning the bow well since Vikir's body wouldn't allow him to use a sword for a while. The goal was to capture a large prey to enhance his reputation. Ayan continued to put pressure on Vikir's back to correct his posture. In pain, Vikir realized that his bones were at their limit. Suddenly, Ayan's wolf appeared behind them, and Ayan was a bit shocked and applied some extra pressure on Vikir's back, resulting in a cracking sound. Vikir fell to the ground in pain, and Ayan asked her wolf, Bakira, if it had found what they were looking for. The wolf howled in response. Ayan commanded Vikir to get up, stating that they would be moving quickly from that point onwards. They soon arrived near a water stream. Ayan explained that this was the area where the river and ocean connect, so both the ocean's water and animals occupy that area. Ayan shared a story her grandmother had told her. A salmon believes that if it successfully swims up the waterfall, it can evolve into a huge beast. However, most salmon fail to rise above that waterfall and fall. They are eventually punished when they fall onto sharp rocks, and the fish that fell become food for an ox bear. Vikir observed the massive bear in front of him and questioned whether it was an ox bear, remarking that it seemed completely different from the ones he had seen before. Ayan clarified that it was no ordinary ox bear, but one born from a superior bloodline and had survived numerous challenges. When Vikir wondered if he was being asked to capture such a formidable creature, Ayan explained that she hadn't instructed Bakira to find a strong female to hunt. Their actual target was the male bear courting the female. Several male bears approached the female bear, and she looked at them for a moment. However, she rejected their advances with force and sent them running away. Vikir was intrigued by the female's behavior and asked how strong a male she was looking for. Ayan corrected his thinking, stating that the female bear wasn't seeking a strong mate. A smaller male bear then approached the female, and they interacted with gentle gestures. Vikir was surprised that the female had chosen the weaker male. Ayan stated that the female bear was looking for a mate that she can boss around. She explained that strong males tend to become aggressive during mating, and there are situations when they kill their partners. Hence, strong bears were unpopular among the ox bears. That was why females of the species preferred weaker and smaller partners. Ayan drew a parallel to how Balak warriors selected their partners, favoring young entities with excellent DNA, especially if they had been weakened due to an injury. Vikir realized that the female bear's interest was primarily in obtaining good DNA. As the bear couple began to walk away, Ayan emphasized that their course of action was to wait, as the female would eventually suppress the male's strength completely. Vikir stood outside a cave, where bear roars and moans were clearly audible. He reflected on the past 4 days, during which he had been providing food to the hungry ox bears to facilitate their mating. Ayan asked Vikir if he had left food for the ox bears, and he confirmed that he had. Ayan held a small fruit that temporarily boosted one's strength but came with the cost of consuming one's lifespan. She explained that the intelligent female bear would understand their intentions and choose not to eat it, while the male would eat it to handle the female. Vikir understood why Ayan had chosen a big and strong female as their target, to deplete the male's strength. Ayan then offered Vikir some soup to help him heal. While drinking the soup, Vikir commented on how the bears were mating intensely. Ayan humorously remarked that it was normal behavior for male Balaks but seemingly unusual for imperial males like Vikir, jokingly attributing it to his origin from a geeky country. Ayan seductively approached Vikir, asking if he could perform like that. However, their conversation was interrupted by a loud voice, and Ayan alerted Vikir to get ready, indicating that the female bear had been impregnated. The female bear let out a loud scream, and the male ran away from the cave in fear. Vikir and Ayan were hiding in a nearby tree, and Vikir asked why the female was chasing the male away. Ayan explained that an ox bear that has finished mating becomes a territorial and competitive predator. The female was warning the male never to come back to her territory. Vikir noted that the male wanted to sleep since she had exhausted her strength and hadn't slept for the past 4 days. Ayan replied that the male would seek a safe and remote place to rest. They planned to follow the male bear and quietly chase after him until he started to sleep, at which point they would begin their hunt. Vikir and Ayan trailed the male bear and arrived in a cold environment. Vikir remarked that the male should be tired, but he was moving quite far away. Ayan explained that the male was searching for a location with the fewest threats the forest posed. The cold environment ensured that mosquitoes, which could suck bones or blood, couldn't survive there. Vikir asked if the ox bear came to this place knowing about it. Ayan replied that an ox bear's intelligence was quite high, and their acquired knowledge was better than their instincts, allowing them to make strategic decisions. Vikir felt cold due to his body's condition, but he hesitated to admit it. Ayan noticed and offered to share body warmth by putting their bodies close together, but Vikir denied her offer, saying that he was fine. She warned him that if his body temperature decreases, his body will become stiff, and if his body becomes stiff, it will hinder their hunting efforts. Vikir was surprised by her rational reasoning and wondered if she was capable of making such logical decisions. After a moment of thought, he decided to accept her offer. He suddenly hugged her from behind and Ayan's face turned red, and she tried to justify it as concern for her slave's health, stating that it was a master's duty to look after her slave's well-being. Suddenly, Ayan's wolf, Bakira, stopped and growled while looking ahead. Ayan noticed that the ox bear's footsteps had disappeared. She wondered where it went, but before she could finish her sentence, the ox bear, which had been hiding nearby, let out a loud growl and attacked her. The barbarians were gathered together, their eyes filled with excitement as they beheld a massive boar before them. They marveled at the size of the beast, recognizing that its meat could feed the entire tribe abundantly. One of the female barbarians expressed her hunting achievement, stating that she had only managed to catch 3 rabbits, clearly overshadowed by the impressive boar in front of them. A male barbarian chimed in, addressing Ahun directly and acknowledging that the boar he had hunted was indeed a remarkable catch. The female barbarian praised Ahun and proposed that he should be the hunting commander going forward, given his successful feat. The male barbarian agreed with the idea, pointing out that there are limits to what even the skilled hunting commander Ayan could achieve alone. He brought up the fact that she had taken a slave with her on the hunt. In response, Ahun exuded confidence and dismissed the slave as a burden to Ayan. He confidently predicted that she would return empty-handed, without even having caught a single rabbit. On the other side, the fearsome male ox bear attacked Ayan. However, Vikir, who was holding Ayan, pulled her back just in time, causing the bear's punch to miss her face by a few inches. The force of the punch blew some of Ayan's hair away. Both Vikir and Ayan fell from the back of the wolf they were riding, and the wolf growled at the ox bear. The wolf retaliated by leaping at the ox bear to protect its companions. Concerned for Ayan's safety, Vikir asked if she was okay. Ayan expressed her gratitude to him for saving her and replied that she had survived thanks to him. Vikir speculated whether the bear had lured them into a trap. Ayan acknowledged the bear's cunning intellect, which surpassed that of other monsters. She understood why the female bear chose the male bear as a mate. Realizing that they couldn't avoid a head-on battle, Ayan looked at Vikir and felt conflicted. She thought about how she had received help from the slave and worried about her dignity as his master. Suddenly, Ayan steeled herself and commanded Vikir to stay behind her while she took charge of the fight. She asserted that she would show him her dignity as his master. With determination, she mounted the wolf's back and chased after the bear. Vikir commented on the unique way of the Balak slaves, jokingly referring to himself as a slave lazing around while the master is working. As Ayan reached a vantage point, she began firing arrows at the ox bear. She shouted with conviction, expressing her displeasure at the bear's indecent behavior in front of her slave, and vowed that it would pay for its actions. The ox bear sought cover behind an ice rock, attempting to evade Ayan's arrows. Undeterred, Ayan prepared to launch another arrow and warned the bear that a good arrow would pierce through steel, emphasizing that its hiding wouldn't save it from her aim. Ayan fired her arrow at the ox bear, but it got stuck in the rock, failing to pass through it. But to the bear's surprise, a powerful blue energy beam pierced its stomach, causing it to spew out blood and growl in pain. Vikir was astonished by the unexpected attack that had struck the ox bear, which had been hiding behind the rock. He realized that the wave of aura from the arrow had passed precisely through the boulder and pierced the bear. He marveled at Ayan's archery skills, considering them akin to an art form and recognizing her exceptional hunting abilities. Vikir remarked that judging solely by her skills, Ayan might surpass even Camus Morg. The wounded ox bear emerged from its hiding place with bloodshot eyes and charged at Ayan with rage. She responded by shooting an arrow at its eyes, but the bear continued its relentless charge. In response to the bear's persistence, Ayan confidently prepared another arrow, asserting that an arrow filled with her sincerity was powerful enough to break through a castle wall. She released the arrow, but to her surprise, the ox bear managed to dodge the attack, leaving Ayan shocked and bewildered. Before Ayan could fully comprehend the situation, the bear struck the wolf she was riding, sending her flying back and rolling on the ground. In the midst of the intense battle, Ayan recalled her mother's words. Her mother had mentioned that when a beast with dull senses nears death, it can sense the killing intent of a person. Ayan realized that she had underestimated the ox bear, and had been careless in thinking she had cornered it perfectly. Despite her righteous intentions in shooting the last arrow, she now faced a dangerous and formidable adversary. The ox bear menacingly approached her, its mouth drooling. The bear opened its mouth wide, ready to bite. Overwhelmed with fear, Ayan closed her eyes and braced herself for the impending danger. However, just as the ox bear was about to attack, Ayan heard a familiar voice calling out to her, asking if she was done showing what a master's dignity is like. When she opened her eyes, she saw Vikir standing before her. Vikir stepped forward to confront the ox bear and confidently declared that it was now his turn to take action. He thrust his empty hand towards the beast, which began to glow red, and soon Beelzebub emerged from his hand. Vikir wielded the power of Cerberus flame, and the ox bear's head was engulfed in flames, causing it to slide back in pain. Ayan watched in awe as she wondered if that powerful attack was indeed fire, witnessing the bear's head being roasted alive. The ox bear let out a final growl before succumbing to its injuries, falling lifelessly on the ground. As the battle ended, the bandages around Vikir's body had burned away with the fire, and his previously injured eye had been healed. Ayan couldn't help but blush as she looked at Vikir, grateful for his timely intervention and amazed by his incredible abilities. However, her joy turned to concern when she saw Vikir's face and posture distort in pain. He admitted that using that powerful skill had taken a toll on his body. Vikir collapsed onto the ground, leaving Ayan shocked and confused by the sudden turn of events. She called out his name with worry, unsure of how to help him after witnessing his tremendous display of strength. At night, the barbarians gathered in one place, dancing around a fire in celebration. They cooked food in a huge pot and distributed it among others. Ayan and Vikir sat on the side, wearing traditional hats. Ayan spoke about how the hunter who catches the largest prey receives the villagers' respect and admiration. Vikir, however, seemed indifferent, which led Ayan to criticize him for his lack of enthusiasm. She explained that the ox bear, being both strong and intelligent, was an honorable catch, making them the main figures of the pillaging ceremony. She compared the ox bear to a sluggish and scared boar, indicating the significance of their achievement. Ayan then questioned Ahan, who was standing beside Vikir, to support her point. Ahan in frustration handed a bowl to Vikir while referring to him as a slave. Vikir was confused about the small amount of meat in his bowl, and asked why he didn't receive more. Ahan replied that the amount of honor he gained was worth the meat he had received. Ayan clarified to Vikir that it was a tradition where the one who contributed the most to the hunt received the least amount of meat but gained a corresponding amount of honor. Ahan, in frustration, wished he could give Vikir more meat. Vikir pondered on the idea that becoming more honorable meant getting less meat, questioning whether the meat was better than such useless honor. Ayan chuckled, finding Ahan's sour expression amusing, clearly annoyed by his reaction. Vikir looked down at his hand and contemplated the 600 kilograms hammer that he had acquired from Beelzebub after catching the ox bear. He wondered if it was possible to increase his weight by 600 kilograms while holding his breath. He then drank the soup and realized that the skill was not all he had gained. After Beelzebub absorbed the ox bear, Vikir's body recovered significantly. Ayan, wanting to offer Vikir more meat, gave him a bowl filled with meat, explaining that it was a hunter's right. However, Vikir declined her offer as he had already received a portion of meat, a bowl of blood, and a portion of intestines. Ayan insisted that Vikir should eat the additional meat, emphasizing that he should consume different body parts according to his weaknesses. She encouraged him to eat it. She explained that one should eat eyes if the eyes are bad, eat the heart if your heart is weak, and if your limbs are weak, You eat its legs. Vikir looked at the bowl, questioning if the long thing in it was indeed the intestine and if his insides were that weak. Just then, 3 barbarian girls arrived at the scene. The first one scolded Ayan, calling her a commander and accusing her of looking after what was already hers. The second girl pointed out her transparent motives, and the third girl questioned why she would give anything to the slave. Meanwhile, Vikir continued eating the meat, finding it very chewy, and Ayan watched in excitement as he gulped down the meat. She then smiled and stated that now he would be able to fulfill his duty. Vikir kept chewing and wondered what more she expected from him, considering he believed he had done his part during the hunt. As the new morning arrived, Vikir stood near a large tree trunk whose top was cut. He noticed the tree melting a little, confirming what Ayan said the previous night.